Hello, and welcome to another episode of People in Legal, where we bring stories and insights from people in the legal tech industry. Today, I can see the conversation flowing a couple of different directions, including high performing teams, publishing books, invincibility, and also keeping a secret. My name is Andrew Hay, and I'm the host for today. For today's episode, I'm joined by Sydney based founder, and I'd really like to provide a really warm welcome to Ronnie Millard, who is the founder and CEO of the Wellbeing Edge and Tribe, a sales and marketing consultancy business. Welcome, Ronnie. And let's jump straight into it. So, Ronnie, could you maybe just start by telling us a bit about yourself and your career journey so far?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Andrew, for the warm welcome. So I have been in the corporate arena for the last 30 years, showing my age. Born and bred in Egypt, and then relocated and was brought up in England, and then for the last 15 years have been based here in Sydney, Northern Beaches, with my husband and 3 kids. Marketing and sales has always been my forte, and have loved it, and seen it go through a lot of evolution over the last few decades, and now going into what my why is, my passion, which is health and wellness.
Awesome. And look, we'll talk about that in a little bit as well. I think let's maybe start a little bit on maybe your personal story and the legal lens, and then we'll jump in a bit later around some of the things that you're specifically doing now, which is really cool. So, Ronnie, with you've spent last couple of decades leading teams, high pressure environment, in particular in that legal environment as well, kind of observed in the way that legal professionals approach performance and well-being?
Yeah, great question. Look, I think over the last few years, it's definitely improved. But coming from that sector, it is a continual level of high performance and pressure where, it's almost that, the celebration of endurance over energy is something to be proud of. It's like a badge of honor that you're working hard and maintaining this constant output level, where well-being seems to be an afterthought as opposed to part and parcel of one's performance. And even the metrics around, well, what does well-being look like? What does it feel like? How does health of oneself be a metric that is holding others accountable? And for me, that's the gap. Whilst over the last few years, as I said, I have seen an improvement, and there are well-being days, and there is progression towards identifying and acknowledging and then celebrating somebody as an individual that comes into work but does have a life outside. But I think there's a massive, massive opportunity to really and authentically support people so that their mental health and well-being is intact and is actually seen as critical to productivity. They're both sides of the same coin, and that's where I'm going into and why I'm so excited to be able to contribute to closing that gap.
Yeah. And I think you brought up a couple of really interesting things around, again, what I've seen in a lot of my time around in consultancy, but I think it definitely resonates in the legal profession as well, of the billable hour sort of versus longevity type of approach. Is that something that you think, almost as part of that well-being or the approach of it? Do you think it's almost a short-term approach of I've got this year versus, and we'll sort out the future? What's your sort of perspective on that sort of side?
Yeah, it's so layered because, you've got an organization, a law firm or a legal entity, and, the commercials and the KPIs and the BHAGs, they are key to that law firm, to keep going, and being able to keep up with those commercials is critical. And it's almost, I've been in those conversations where they're non-negotiable. The numbers have to be met at any cost. And so what that means is the pressure then that is overlaid over those individuals that feel they have this responsibility and there's no way out of contributing and meeting them, and not even meeting them, but, overachieving, is brutal. And what that means is most people can't switch off because, you get home and you've probably worked over hours anyway. And it just becomes this cycle, this vicious cycle that many struggle to be able to create the boundaries to come out of and switch off when they go home. And so that starts to dilute into one's well-being and their mental capacity and the emotional and the physical and all of it. And I think resilience, what I've seen is resilience is so often confused with, pushing through no matter what the cost. And I think people not being able to ascertain, well, what is the measure of good? What's the measure of a good day? Is it that I met all my KPIs for the day, that I put in the right number of hours, or is it that I actually understood what the boundaries were and that I actually left on time and I went home and I had enough hours sleep, or I sat with my family, or whatever it is. And I think the lines are just so blurred at the moment that it's a real, I look at it as a real positive, right? There's a real opportunity there, and it's all doable. It's just about being brave enough to have the conversations that need to be had, as opposed to the silence, which then just exacerbates the
it becomes an all or nothing type approach then as well. Things build up to a point when it's just doesn't work. Maybe just almost on that point exactly. I think everyone has sort of some sort of turning point in the pressure, the build, almost the God complex, a little bit of I'm invincible. Did you have that sort of that part where there was a personal turning point, and how did you realize that, and how did you then realize that to become sustainable you actually needed to change?
Yeah, well, this is where and you'd said it at the start about the secret. So I have always loved what I did. In the corporate world, I was named a machine, a weapon. Anything that was high performance, I was attracted to. I was a gun. And many people would say, well, how are you doing that? You've got a husband, you've got 3 young children, you're working full time. How are you doing all of it? You must be a superhero. And I would wear that like a badge of honor. And I honestly was going at 100 miles an hour. For the last few years, I was actually running on fumes and was burnt out, but didn't know it. And if anyone had asked me, are you okay? Are you happy? I would have said, absolutely. I'm in a great spot. I love my job. I love my family. I love my friends. I'm doing it all, and I'm juggling, and I'm doing it with flair. And I think for me, I just carried that invincibility, thinking bad things happen to other people.
Yeah,
I can keep going. And for many years, I was on 5 long blacks a day. I was eating processed food, sugar, no exercise. I mean, health for me was I didn't even contemplate it. And, working all the hours. I mean, I would work all day, come home, dinner for the kids, and then be back on the laptop, fall asleep, wake up and have another stint, and probably around 5 hours on average sleep a night. And then bit by bit, my body started talking to me saying, look, I'm not happy. You need to slow down. Once it was pins and needles in my hands and feet. And then I realized I had low deficiency in B6 and B12. But just over the years, things started to fall by the wayside, and I would fix them. Anemia, fix with an iron infusion. Like I said, supplementation for stiffness and pins and needles. Fertility issues, would fix them. And then ultimately, the wake-up call for me was when I got diagnosed with breast cancer some years ago.
Yep.
And that for me was, as anyone with cancer or who's looked after somebody with a chronic illness, that was a terrifying looking at the bottom of a barrel moment. And for some time, we didn't know whether it had spread. We didn't know how serious it was. And then you just think, what was I chasing? What was I looking for? What did good look like for me? And that invincibility just totally became irrelevant at that point. It was around fighting for my life. And I think now what I do around invincibility is my invincibility isn't stemmed and rooted in how many meetings can I go to, how many BHAGs and KPIs can I smash, how many investors and board members and stakeholders can I make happy. My ego took a backseat, and it was around my invincibility now being rooted in my health and well-being. And that's now how I measure my days, my weeks, my years, and have been over the last few years since I've been the fittest I've ever been. But it was because of that turning point.
And as part of that as well, have you actually seen how you work change at all? Like, again, because I think I'll share a little bit here as well. So as I had a similar sort of thing of, I'd work hard, play hard, and just keep going and that sort of thing. And I've realized that I need to focus on as my wife says, get my angries out, which is exercise, I'm actually a nicer person to be around, but I actually also think much better. Is that, again, a similar concept for you of, have you actually seen change that's come about from that?
Oh, I mean, 100%. I've done a complete 360. I now, over the last few years, have such a different perspective on me and what my body needs. And I've done that through a number of small rituals, which every day, every week have changed. So now that I have this new normal where, because, in the beginning, it can be quite overwhelming. You don't know what you want. You don't know where you're going to go. You kind of does tend to strip you quite bare. And if you're bold and courageous enough to go into those dark places, and I know it sounds quite formulaic, but it's so true. It's figuring out, well, what do I need to live a good life? And what does a good life mean for me? And for me, touching on yours, I fell in love with running. Running became, first it was running 1K and then 2K and then 5 and then 10 and then half marathons and, looking to do a marathon next. And it's like, well, running is so good for me, but also it helps me to release all of those thoughts. I get to solve problems while I'm running. And then it was, okay, some ice baths and some saunas, infrared saunas. And then it became around, what else do I love? Walking in the grass without my shoes on when I'm walking the dogs. And bit by bit, you start to, and some things you drop if they don't feel right, but it becomes holistic. And that's part of what the well-being edge is around. It's around finding your edge. So what is it that will make you wholesome when it comes to physical, when it comes to mental, emotional, food, and all the other wonderful things that we need to make us well in our being, which is where the well-being edge was formed. So I totally agree. There's no overnight fix. I've realized there's no shortcuts. The discipline that I placed into my corporate work is the discipline that I now place on my health and well-being. And I think, Andrew, one of the key points that I want to make is I'm still an advocate for high performance in the workplace. Like, I still put my best foot forward every single day. But the ethos is you can have well-being in both. You can be brilliant in both health and well-being, but also the corporate. They don't have to dilute each other. It's just about boundary setting.
And maybe this shows that I'm a complete diehard fan, but I remember I only watched it the other day on a flight. So go with me for a second on this one. It probably sounds very weird, but John McClane who's, Bruce Willis, is a very, very nervous flyer. And there's this guy who sits next to him, and he basically, I don't know how I remember this, sorry, but he goes through and he says, look, reduce your stress when you get off. So when you get off the plane, take your shoes off, your socks off, go to the grass and create fists with your toes, and it'll relieve your tension and your stress. So complete, like out of here point. But I think, it's the same concept of walking on the grass with your shoes, and it's just different ways of releasing tension, to be honest. And so maybe then just, again, moving on from that slightly, sorry about the random tangent.
No, I love it.
But you kind of mentioned at the start that, law firms, they're doing some wellbeing days, and corporates in general as well. And where do you think the legal industry is actually at in relation to prioritizing staff wellbeing? And, are there any grassroots signs of things changing, or do you think everything's great, or there's companies who are leading and others following? Where do you kind of think or see it's at? And are you seeing it as something that's evolving and people are prioritizing, or firms are prioritizing?
Look, I think that it's a conversation that's being had with some, and I think it's definitely on the radar. And I don't think an organization can ignore what's happening and all the stats that are around in terms of mental health and, number of days that people are taking off because they're not well, or the number of statistics just in general. And especially not just for us and our age, but for, the generations behind us. And I think it's definitely a conversation that's being had, but I do feel that there are some where it's a tick box exercise. And I think that well-being, to be done well and with authenticity and trueness, really needs to start to, if it's going to embed itself in a culture properly, you need to start from the roots. And I think, there are some legal firms and organizations that are doing things well. They have well-being coaches, they have psychologists that are being part of the team, and these members are starting to recommend and influence the culture. How can we start to embed health and well-being to a culture? But I think the metrics, we're long past NPS, and we're long past, these surveys that get done. It's like, well, you think about an organization and how much data we have and how informed decision making needs to be done on data. If you scratch the surface and you go into organizations, and I've done this and said, well, where are your health metrics? How are you defining health and well-being? There aren't many that are doing it well. And it's great that we have EAP, and it's great that we have mental well-being days off and have a day off for your birthday, are you okay campaigns. But there's so much more to be done, because levels of absenteeism are still high. 1 in 2 people will have cancer by the age of 80, 85. And that's not even including other chronic diseases.
Yep.
And you think, well, on somebody's typical watch in a typical organization, whether it's enterprise, mids or small, there will be people that are either not well and don't know it, or not well and don't want to say anything. And because of, fear, and that takes form in many different ways. And there is so much opportunity to make someone feel psychologically safe. But it's well, what does that mean for somebody? Because it manifests and resonates with people in different ways. So I think, going to your point in summary with law firms, there are some great things that are being done, but I don't see that being a norm, a standard. And for a industry where it's all about KPIs, the hours, as we know, it's ruthless. And I think to make some positive change, there really needs to be some hard conversations with that, where, as I said, mental health and well-being becomes part and parcel of the conversation and not a tick box exercise or an afterthought.
So, and this is probably a loaded question, but who should actually lead that within an organization? Is that again, I'll put some thoughts out there, probably not where I personally believe they should go, but again, let's just bring them out into the open. Because again, if I would talk to a senior leader, they may go, oh, well, that's a HR issue, a hiring issue around setting expectations, or those sort of things. But for me, I think this is more of a culture type thing as well, of trying to build who you are and how you then work. So, and maybe I'm setting you up for the right answer here, but that sounds like it's actually at the leadership level of how are we going to build our culture of who we are and how we work and why we work the way we do, to ensure that we build our culture sort of perspective. So it's not just a HR issue.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And I think, HR, even the function of HR is evolving over the last few years. They've gone through a massive transformation. It's not, HR aren't the people function and, just pass, that issue challenge over to them. It's not that anymore. I think, the executive leadership and there may be different levels of leadership, which I think need to be involved as a whole. And it's really staying true to, well, what are your values? And I've seen it so many times before, the values are plastered on the wall, and then you send out on LinkedIn and do some promotional advertising around things that showcase that it's a company that is supporting mental health and well-being. But like I said, it's so much more than that. It's going down to the root level of how will we show our staff that we care? What is the sentiment, stock of sentiment at particular points in time, so that you can ascertain how safe do staff feel to bring to life if they are unwell, or if they're looking after somebody that's unwell, or even if they just feel like they're hurtling towards burnout. How do they feel around having those conversations that are maybe awkward or maybe uncomfortable? And then how safe do they feel that the company can support them through any phase of that, of where they're at? Are there policies that are clearly on the intranet? Are there policies that showcase what scenarios would look like should somebody come forth and talk about their feeling? And I think a key for me is, how are the executives themselves exemplifying mental health and well-being? What are they doing that showcases that they truly believe in looking after their health? Because then that translates obviously down. Are there wonderful activities that are done that bring the company together? What does that mean for different sets of generation, different groups of people, from different cultures and different backgrounds? So it's not a one size fits all. It's not a cookie cutter approach. It's really focused on a custom type of program that suits each and every organization. And I think there is so much opportunity for that. So it's exciting, because we know that, as we live longer, we're more prone potentially to get sick. And I keep saying in my talks, you only have one body. You don't get to trade it in the older that you get. And so we spend so much time at work. We spend so much time thinking about our jobs. But we need the help. We need the help of the employer to really showcase that they care, because productivity will then come. That's the crazy thing. Productivity is such a wonderful result if everyone feels that they are their best selves at work every day.
Yeah. And look, that's probably a really good segue into what you're actually doing now. So look, I've seen that you've recently launched the Wellbeing Edge. I think, and I'm going to make some assumptions and do correct me wrong, but you've spoken about some things just literally today around, ensuring that more support is there, that there's the need of, and literally just then around the need for sort of a custom program to try and meet the goals around what a business, where they're at and actually then where they want to go. So could you actually talk the audience through today around what is the Wellbeing Edge and what is it, how does it work, and how do you actually then work with businesses to try and meet the goals that they either know or don't know?
Yeah, no, thank you for that. So there's different services that I offer. So the first thing is around keynote speaking. So, because of my lived experience and because I know what it feels like to work, your bum off, and I know what it's like to then have your personal life and to juggle and to get ill, and not to just get ill once, but to get ill multiple times. So that burnout and that running on fumes, those lived experiences I bring through my keynote. And like I said before, the keynotes are so inspirational and so uplifting, but the ethos is, you don't have to dilute one part of your life for the other. You can be your best self at work and be that high performer while still maintaining your health and well-being. So that's one service. The other one is coaching. I do one-on-one coaching for high exec professionals, and just to help them to get back on an even keel if they feel like they're hurtling towards burnout or they're in burnout.
From their own personal perspective as well.
Exactly, yeah. And then the other one is to the point that you made is health and wellness corporate programs. So through either proactive or reactive frameworks based on where the company is at, but really going in and looking under the hood and ascertaining, right, health and well-being is your objective here. You want to increase the productivity of your staff. You want to make sure that you're wrapping your corporate arms around them, and that you're enabling them to feel safe at work and do their best self, irrespective not irrespective, but in conjunction with them feeling that they're not in a good place for whatever reason. And so helping those organizations uplift and improve their health and well-being programs, so that, as I said, you just have a staff that feel loyal, retained and safe and healthy. Health and well-being obviously being the overarching and the underarching objective.
I know that you work a lot with women in legal. We've done a lot with women in legal and people in legal in the past, but let's maybe just jump into that in a bit more detail. So, Ronnie, you work with women, in particular senior women, across the corporate sectors. Are there specific challenges that you're seeing for women in the legal industry today?
Great question. The short answer is yes. A lot of the women that I coach it's incredible how it's the same conversation, but just with a different female. The number of women that have burnout and know that they're in that phase, hurtling towards it at such speed, and can sense that it's going to all literally, break up, is, I want to say, it's so sad, but it's all also wonderful that they're reaching out and know that they just don't feel right in their bodies. When I was experiencing burnout, I had racing thoughts. I would have no time to celebrate any wins. It was just going on to the next thing. I would feel disorientated sometimes with just how much I had going on. And those are the conversations that I'm having with my clients at the moment, because there is that feel that they have to juggle home life and they want to get ahead. It's not just about staying where they are. That's another conversation with the women I'm seeing, is they want to keep going. They want to keep getting promoted and they want to achieve more and they love what they do. But what I'm experiencing with them is they do have this kind of emotional detachment in some areas. They do have decision paralysis, where they start questioning themselves and not knowing if they're making the right decisions. And that's part of the burnout, is because they're not able to think clearly. They're not able to have focused time and be present. Some of my clients talk about feeling like numb. They just, again, to how I was feeling, just unable to enjoy or even feel sad, or even internalize and reflect on a meeting that you just had. And so they start to feel undervalued, and that undervalued starts to take place in terms of negative self-talk. And then they just start to shrink and start to sort of disappear from their lives. And that's when the burnout happens. And burnout can take form in many cases. It can be having a nervous breakdown. It can be going off and just feeling like you can't speak to anyone, just totally becoming a shell of yourself. Or it can be unable to sleep and just feeling wired. It's just the impact on one's mental health and well-being is so, it's almost criminal. And yet as women, they still have to turn up the next day. So you put your face on like I did, and you just pretend that everything's fine. And so working with those women, what I do is, it's not about fixing them, but it's just about taking things back to grassroots level and figure out, what is it that you want? It sounds like such a simple question, and the answer should just magically appear, but it doesn't. It's like, what are you chasing?
Like the first sort of, is that your first step, that you'd almost go and say, like, how do we change this? How do we recalibrate?
Yeah, it's starting from you as a person. What is it that you want? What does good look like? You know, what does it, fast forward into a place where you've got everything is great, and you've got all that you desire. What does that look like? And more often than not, the more you delve into those types of questions, the more the women that I work with realize that actually what they were chasing wasn't anything worth anything, because they realized that what they've done is they've diluted so much of their own mental health and well-being, but they realized that they were just caught in the rat race, and the rat race just had them get into this vicious cycle, this hamster wheel, where at the end, what, you know, is it a title promotion?
Like a self-fulfilling prophecy. You're almost told that you need to do, but do you really?
Exactly. It's just, but it's having the time to be present enough, to stay focused enough, to actually ask yourself the right questions, which will lead to fulfillment. If it is a pay rise, if it is a promotion, it may be flexibility. It may be that you want to step back and you just want, you know, to work 2 days a week as opposed to 4 or 5. There are so many aspects that one needs to just have enough time to figure out, what does good look like in their lives? You know, what makes you happy? Where is the energy being drained from? You know, what is the environment that you're working in? Is it sustainable? And it's those types of things that, you know, we get to the crux of. And for me, I realized a lot of it was ego. I loved being needed. I loved my team, and I loved my team. You know, I just loved everyone needing me, but it was, you know, I was going home and my family were getting the crumbs. So, you know, it's not sustainable. And that's, I guess, in summary to your question, that's what I'm seeing with my female clients in legal sector. It's not sustainable.
And those priorities can change, right? Around what your, again, I call it priorities, but around what your focus is, and, you know, how you've got 100% of time where, or your internal time as well, of where you actually want to spend that. As, you know, the career, as your family, as other things go on, that can change. You know, what's important now versus what's important in 2-3 years. While it may be the same umbrella, but the individual specific thing can definitely change.
Yeah, it can. And I think, going back to the point that we were talking about culture, it's around, well, the company needs to work alongside that person that is evolving and changing. You in your 20s is different from you in your 30s and your 40s. You start to have more life experiences and promotions and all the rest of it. I mean, it's just, there's so many variables that change one as they grow older. But with that, as I said before, you're still in the same body, you're still in the same mind, and your experiences can either shape or break you. And my ethos is around consistent and disciplined actions every single day towards your health and well-being that will allow you to remain strong of heart and mind and soul and all of it, but working alongside the organization, so the executive and the, you know, the powers that be, the HR functions, the company as a whole, all working together alongside. So there is that consistent alignment. And I think that's the key, because as one grows old, as one grows and becomes more seasoned, you know, what we don't want is to see that gap where the company is not evolving in line with its staff. But again, that's why you have those sentiment surveys, and you start keeping track of the KPIs, and maybe the KPIs and the metrics need to change. So that's, but that's what I mean, Andrew. It's around being bold, continually being bold to have the conversations that need to be had.
So I think, and you mentioned this a couple of minutes ago, but around sort of the burnout and what some of the signs are, I think you mentioned, like the feeling of numb, self-doubt, sleeping problems. Are there things, and again, let's come back to the core around visibility and also knowing oneself, but also, as a leader in a business, of knowing or seeing signs within your team, and, this is something that we should definitely be looking at. Are there signs that, again, I hit off on 2 or 3, and I think you mentioned a couple earlier as well, but are there core signs that you think that people themselves and or leaders need to look out for their, and maybe not just women in specifically, but even just in general?
Yeah, look, I think there are a fair few signs which, as we know, are the standard ones, checking in terms of how someone's looking, are they, has their dress sense sort of deteriorated? Are they looking tired? Were they coming across? Are they talking in one word responses, whereas before they were quite, open and conversational? So it's body language, it's dress, the signs that in terms of, skin and how they're presenting. And I think those are standard ones. But I think, and what I do, and I used to do this with my team, is, having those daily check-ins. And they're not work check-ins, but they're just, how are you today? Yeah. Is there anything I can help with? But that's part of the culture. How many organizations do that and actually create space around doing that to give staff time to respond in a reflective way? But also, when you apply something small like that consistently, it then becomes a safe haven for staff to feel, okay, this isn't not a tick box exercise. This is a staple, part and parcel of each day when I come into work, whether I come in or, on screen. And I think it's those small shifts where you get your staff to feel safe because they know it's a consistent question that's going to be asked, which authentically and truly is asking for a reason that, the manager, the leader wants to know if they're okay. Yep. And if not, if somebody was to say, no, I'm not feeling great today. I've had an argument with my partner, or my kid isn't doing very well at school, then a scenario could be, all right, go back home, take the day off, or it could be, all right, work from home, or why don't you go for a walk around the block and come back? There are so many different scenarios. And I think it's those things that once you start to open up those types of routes, it then gives you feedback. It gives you on the job feedback that you can then start to breathe life into the policies, because policies are policies, right? They're black and white. They're on paper, on a system somewhere, platform. But I think in answer to your question, it's asking questions continually to really get a feel for how staff are. And then you start to get the data that you can start to feed back into the policy. So it's ever evolving. And then the signs, there may be signs that you could think of all the signs, but then you see something with a staff member and you're like, oh my God, she or he answered that question. But actually what I'm hearing through active listening, through really listening, is what she or he hasn't said. And then you start to mention those and start to open things up where you can have that transparency. But it all comes down to trust, right? Which is part and parcel, which if you don't have the trust, you're not going to have staff that want to share openly because they're worried about what the ramifications are. Will I lose my job? Will this mean I'm not put up for a promotion coming forwards? There's a whole, but that's again, all the stuff that is discussed to get under the hood.
Yeah. And look, I think that's a great call out actually, because again, I think it's around actually building an individual connection and actually knowing your team and your staff. But I think coming to your point around the vulnerability side of it, I think as leaders, actually showing vulnerability of this is, again, it doesn't have to be now, or this is what I've seen. It could be about yourself or it could be about others, but I think it helps build that everything's not okay all of the time.
Yeah.
And that you can then build that rapport with people. So when somebody actually needs that time, that they actually will share it with you, because I think that's actually, in my view, probably one of the fundamental things of, because if people don't let you know, or if you can't read and see,
Yeah, spot on.
it's it just keeps evolving the challenge.
Spot on. But your point is so, I mean, you put it so eloquently, and that's the other thing that we do at the Wellbeing Gig is you train the staff to be able to know how to active listen. It's a skill, but you also train them to be able to identify, if somebody's going through a trauma, if somebody is presenting well, but you can see that something isn't quite right and you can't quite put your finger on it. And normally we just go, oh, well, I'm sure he or she will be fine. But it's all of that. And I think that is where you get the productivity comes into play, because staff will want to, because they'll feel so looked after and so blessed to be in an organization that really does care. And I think we're just not, as a country, we are just not there yet. But I think it's just education. I see a lot of organizations that want to do well and they are invested, but they just don't know how, and they just don't know where to start. So yeah, I think, but you made the point really well.
So again, maybe this is a complete tangent, but how do you actually go about and the word's not convincing. I don't know what the word is, because I think that's wrong, because if you have to convince, that's probably part of the challenge. But how do you actually get people to understand and or see or know that there is a problem? Because again, you called out the productivity sort of a great example that, again, you see a lot of press, a lot of view and things going both completely different directions is remote versus in person.
Yeah.
Now, so thinking of the wellness and the well-being sort of part, how do you actually get people to get their head around this will increase productivity, or it will reduce, the need for recruitment fees and the cost of change and all these sort of things. But how do you actually go about doing that? Or is it a thing of, for you, you're actually better off working with people who already know and have an understanding that part of the problem's there? I don't know. How do you do the juggle?
Yeah, great question. Look, I have had a few conversations already very much on that theme. For those that are of the ilk that need to be convinced, it's all around looking, okay, what are your data points? Show me how many number of days on average someone has been taken off through not being in the office, being absent. When you did your last ENPS survey, what were the results? What were the questions? How many of them were linked to health and well-being sentiment? And what can we draw from them without being too assumptive? Obviously, we know being too assumptive can be dangerous. But it's looking for those organizations. I just look at what they've already got, and then we start to build a narrative out of them. So with the absenteeism, with the ENPS score per function, so maybe sales might have a lower NPS score than marketing, for example. I'm just bringing out examples of where I've been in the past. And one organization was just because the salespeople were so burnt out. So you start maybe by looking at function, and you say, of these, just for ease, of these 20 salespeople that are showcasing a low ENPS, is that catered towards the boss, who possibly isn't focusing enough on them? Is it focused towards the organization? They don't believe in the values. How is that function performing against its KPIs? Are they below? And if they are smashing it, is it at the detriment because their absent days is through the roof? Or if they are ill and they've shared that with you, what are the policies in place to help them come back into work and recover, on work's time? So I always start with the data that they have, and then I encourage, what if we put together a survey or injected another question in the upcoming ENPS, so that we could just extend the story a little bit.
Well.
Yeah, exactly. But also the values, the number of times, it's shocking, the number of times I've seen companies that have their values, and then I challenge them and I say, okay, this value of trust here, how does that replicate itself in the interviewing process? How do you have your staff live that trust value each and every day? And it's tumbleweed. And that's the heart of it. When you look at your policies, where does trust play into it?
It's aligning them, right? Because it may be, this sounds maybe crazy, but it may be that's actually how you want to be, but it's just then removing it from your principles. So that, again, that's probably the nth degree of it. If it's obviously there in your principles, that's probably what you're trying to get at. But it's a really good call out. Really good call out.
Yeah. It's people. It's people's lives. That's the heart of it. You know, you are someone's mum, dad, uncle, godson. I don't know. It's like everybody wants to be well. And it's so, this is the thing, Andrew, after my cancer and all the other chronic disease I had, it was just so sad that I never cared enough about myself to invest in me with, and it's simple stuff. It's all there. The good food, the celery juice, the fruit, the veg, the exercise. It's all there. Like a lot of the remedies are nature's best gift to us. And all it takes is for companies, yes, I understand, to still chase the commercials. But when you think about the commercials, it's just so achievable. That's the great thing. It's so achievable.
I always find that it's every company you talk to, they all have a 1-year plan. Sure, that might be sales and other things, but they also have a 3 and 5 year plan.
Yeah.
So it's almost the way up of between those two things of how things are actually going to work. Because again, you might be able to meet the 1-year plan, but you actually shoot yourself and your business in the foot for, actually how you're going to evolve.
Exactly. And to the point that you were just making, on whose time is that 3 to 5 year plan going to be made? It's someone's blood, sweat and tears. It's some leader who has the responsibility to make sure that the shareholders and the board of directors and the investors, that they're all happy. But on at what cost? And again, my point, because I just want to be really clear, like I thrive with high performance. Like it's no shortcuts with me. I love working at optimum, but it's just about the boundary setting. You can have both. That's what I keep saying. You can have both. You can be brilliant in both areas, but it's just the awareness and the boundary setting, and then the discipline to just adhere to the rules so that you don't kill yourself, because as we know, no one's indispensable, but you are at home.
No, well, that's a good point, actually. And Ronnie, maybe looking at some practical sort of tips and or tools and those sort of things, is there one like small but powerful shift that people can make to actually improve their own well-being?
Yes, there is. And it took a long time for me to get to this. And it sounds so simple, but for me, it's I choose. So I am in charge of me, and how I respond and how I act to something is in my power. It's my decision. And so with everything is I choose to wake up every morning and have my hot water with lemon, turmeric, ginger, garlic. I choose to do that every morning. I choose to spend my time by ensuring that I have exercise once a day. I choose, not I have to. It's I choose. And I think once you start to, or certainly for me, once I started to embed that perspective of empowerment, it changed everything, because I stopped giving my power away to others. And others could be everything. It could even be your partner, your children. It's not just the work. It's taking stock of your day and saying, I choose to spend it this way. And this way is going to be investing in me. And then everyone else, because for them to get the best, I need to look after me first. So I choose over I have to, or the negative I need to.
Yeah. And similar sort of question, but slightly different. Is there, again, maybe it's a longer one, I don't know, but how can a legal professional actually, some of the things you've spoken about today are around the high performing team, and the sustainability of that as well. How can people, or the legal professional actually look, so not an individual, but the professional as a whole, how can they actually sort of maybe redefine what that ambition and success actually is, to look at those differing factors of powerful sustainability, performance, all these sort of things?
That is a great question. I think it's around, like I said before, having those bold and courageous decisions, but bringing together a cohort of relevant personas in that organization. And first and foremost, agreeing that there is a gap that needs to be filled, and then starting to build what does good look like. So, and I think organizations per organizations need to do this, and an organization needs to start somewhere, but I think it's having the desire and having the awareness that there is a health and wellness agenda item that needs to be consistently placed on the agenda. So when you've got your board agenda and you've got your your numbers and you've got all the different sort of parts that make up that agenda, I think health and well-being needs to be part and parcel, a staple part of that regular agenda item, so that it becomes part and parcel of one's performance. And that for me makes it not just the afterthought, like I mentioned, but it becomes two sides of the coin. So all of this wonderful stuff that we need, the 3-year strategy, the 10-year strategy, how are we going with this, the forecasting, the balance sheet. But it's like with all of that, and I think it should be starting at the top, is that first agenda item is health and well-being. And with that, it's what are the metrics. And so you start to get the frameworks and the mechanics embedded so that you can have the metrics, so that you can have the conversations. And I think that would be a great starting point, the desire, and then the strategy, and then the execution of it.
Awesome. And with that, Ronnie, many thanks for sharing your vulnerabilities and journey with the people in legal audience today. I'm personally really looking forward to see where the Wellbeing Edge goes and to see it thrive. A reminder for the audience to check out the previous People in Legal episodes, where you can also see Ronnie interviewing some people as well, and also the ones in the pipeline. So those can be found on the People in Legal LinkedIn page, as well as on YouTube for full videos, or on Spotify for podcasts. My name is Andrew Hay on behalf of People in Legal. That's a wrap, and many thanks, Ronnie.
Thanks, Andrew.